Okay. The Gemara says, and I've seen this about 25, 30 times at least. It's famous, it's known. The Gemara says since the second base of Mikdash was destroyed, and maybe, I mean, certainly from the first base of Mikdash too as well, but we came back from Babel, and even though we didn't get to the same level, but certainly from the first base of Mikdash, and also for sure from the second base of Mikdash, that the Shari Tefillah have been closed and the Shari Demos remain open. In other words, the gates of Tefillah have been closed, they were closed, and the gates of tears, whatever that means, were not closed. They remain open. So, based upon that, the obvious question is why do we even daven? I mean, you still have a mitzvah to daven anyhow, so it's not really why daven, but why believe or think that our tefillahs can make a difference. If they're closed, they're closed. It means they're bouncing off. You still have an obligation always to do the mitzvah that's before you, regardless of the success. Kol b'yid shemayim chutz m'shemayim means that you have to make the effort to do the right thing, and whatever the results are going to be are really in the hands of God and history that He controls. Hashgacha pratis. So doesn't exactly explain why that they were closed and why the ones with tears should be open. But intuitively, a person would think, well, tefillah. You see how you. I believe I'm not muted here, but you see how it's possible for a person to just go through the motions of davening, not as a possible. It's usually the case that people have a difficult time having kavanah in general, and certainly have a difficult time having kavanah on an ongoing basis because, but crying is usually is an emotional thing. So it sounds like rather than make a minyan of people to come to daven, which they have to daven anyhow, you need a minyan, halacha, right? But we should all come to shul with onions. Basically, you just, whatever it takes to get it going. Kosh Baruch is doing his part, certainly to try to inspire the tears, because enough things are happening in the world today and have been for some time that make you want to cry, make a lot of people want to cry. Some personal things certainly do that, but it seems that's what we should be doing. But on the other hand, even the Hashem b'simcha, we've mitzvah to serve Kosh Baruch Hu joy. The Nefesh HaChaim brings down very specifically from the Zohar that says Hashem shomrecha, Hashem tzilcha al yed yaminecha, which means that basically Shemaim shadows us. So if we're showing a depressed countenance, if we're looking depressed towards the world, then Shemaim will be depressed back towards us. So in a sense, this is constantly a theme throughout Yiddishkeit, where you have these seemingly built-in contradictions that have to be resolved, because obviously you can't have two different realities coexisting. As a contradiction, no. As a paradox, yes, because it just means we don't yet know how to resolve it. They can coexist, but contradictions are contradictions, and if the gates of Shemaim are closed, then they're closed. And it begs the question, what are our tefillahs doing other than earning a schar in the world to come for the effort? But are they making a difference in everyday life? We'd like to believe that they do, and we're certainly told that we do. We act as if, or we're told to act as if we do. Some people believe it, and a lot of people don't. Right, until they really have a situation where they're desperate, in which case you see people putting all their koiches into davening, because whatever, to change the situation. Crying is different. As someone told me recently, he'd like to be able to cry. He has a difficult time crying. He can't get himself to cry even over sad situations. Just that's the way it is. He feels the sadness inside. He certainly acts appropriately, but getting those tears to come to the surface. I mean, in davening on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, there are people who they step into their Shemona Esrei and boom, they are crying right away. I think, how can they start crying so early? It makes you even more distraught if you're trying to get into the mood to be able to do a thing like that, because now it emphasizes the fact how difficult it is for you. Different people have different emotional reactions to situations and control over those emotions. And it's very possible to make yourself cry and still miss the point. Because it's not just the crying itself, it's not just the tears, it's the kavanah, it's all the all the backstory behind those tears, so to speak. Like, what are you actually crying for? Are you really feeling the pain of the Shekhinah? That's the main pain that we should be feeling. That there's no geula. I mean, and even though Shavuos is a yantif, and it's man Torasenu, which is definitely is man simchasenu too, even though it's not Sukkot time, but nevertheless, we're told that the Gula is supposed to begin on Pesach and it's supposed to end on Shavuos, and it didn't happen. As far as we can see, it didn't happen. And as the clock is ticking away, and you're getting down towards the end, and you haven't heard news yet the Mashiach has shown up, that's something to cry about, really, because again, we have to go through more of this now. Like, where is Mashiach? Where is the Geula after all this time? It really should bring tears to our eyes. And the only reason why it hasn't for a lot of people is because, as bad as the situation is, it's not that bad for a lot of people. There's still, we get up in the morning, we carry out our routine. I mean, there's not a morning that goes by, at least in my shul and all the other shuls in my kiryah, and certainly around the world, that people don't show up collecting money in the morning with a story that is really heartbreaking. I mean, people with 14 kids, and the father died, the mother died, someone died. They're now summing. They don't have jobs. They don't have, pensions necessarily. They don't have food on the table. And you just think to yourself what it's like for these children who have to every morning wake up and they're hungry. They don't know where their food's going to come from, or they're making a wedding and everybody else is getting married to fancy weddings. Their friends and they can't. And if you think about it, not too long, it can affect your heart. And this is all part of how Hashem basically is trying to inspire us to feel that emotion and respond. Certainly October 7th, certainly what's happened since then. It's all part of that, to bring out the tears, because those are the gates that are open. Why is it that way? What happened? What changed? Why close the gates of tefillah? And leave the gates of tears open? How does that affect what's going on today? How is what's going today affect that? So I'm going to try to give her an idea. It's a very complicated idea, basically. It's like Kabbalah 404. It's not something that you're going to find discussed in most shiurim, even for those people who do have background in Kabbalah. But I think it's important to know. If I can try to explain it and try to make it somewhat accessible, I think it can help a lot with understanding what's going on today in history. And through this next week, I'm giving a series of classes called the Mystery of Jewish History, which is going to focus more on the details and specifics of this. But there's everything comes down to what we call hashgacha. Hashgacha. You're used to seeing here hashgacha pratis. Some people are familiar with hashgacha klalis, right? These are two levels of hashgacha. Tonight, actually, I saw that the Zohar speaks about 7 types of hashgacha. We're not talking about on kashrus of food and things like that. All it's the same idea. Hashgacha means supervision, that people go and make sure that things are kosher and as kosher as they're supposed to be. There's no cheating going on, right? But this hashgacha, of course, is a kosh baruch hu. And we say, Hinei lo yinu v'lo yishan shema Yisrael. We say that all the time, right? And it means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu he's constantly watching the world. If he's not watching the world for 1 second, the world will cease to exist. Not just become hefker, like ownerless, but it will cease to exist. Meaning that poof, nothing to talk about, right? On the other hand, as Esther spoke about in her tefillah, we say in Chof Beis of Tehillim, right? That why Hashem have you abandoned us? Haman says to Achashverosh. Achashverosh first is the Haman. He says, you want to do this against the Jewish people. I'm worried. My predecessors have tried to do away with the Jewish people, or at least tried to disconnect them from their past and make them loyal to Persia and not to God. And look what's happened to them. Each and every one of them died prematurely. Each and every one of them lost their kingship, right? I don't want to be in a situation like that. So, why are you suggesting we continue on with that risk? And Haman comes back with an answer. It's kind of baffling to most people unless you understand Kabbalah and Amalek, right? Haman says, because their God is sleeping. And how do I know their God is sleeping? Because the Jewish people are sleeping. So if they're sleeping, then God's sleeping. Well, but we just finished saying that God doesn't sleep. So it doesn't mean God's sleeping. So The truth is, we actually see this alluded to in the Chumash itself, but you need the Zohar to explain things like this. The Jewish people say to Moshe Rabbeinu in Parshas B'Shalach, right? Parshas B'Shalach is the splitting of the sea. And after the sea has split, the Jewish people, they get the man, and the man is, a big celebration too. And then at the end of the parsha, despite all the miracles that Hashem has done for them, they complain about the lack of water, which understandably so. You're in the desert, you're in the midbar, it's a very dangerous place to be without water, right? They didn't ask nicely. They should have simply said to Moshe Rabbeinu, hi, we're just wondering, I don't know if you noticed that people are thirsty, there's no water right now, we're going to the desert. What's your plan? Where do we get the water from? Is it being flown in, right? Is there going to be something mystical happen? Rain from Shemaim. What's the plan? We believe that this has a solution, and God will take care of us because He has until now. They didn't do that. Instead, they said, "Hayesh Hashem b'kibbeinu imayin," right? Is God amongst us or not? That's the question they asked. So Rashi there says on the spot, V'yavo Amalek. So Amalek attacks. So what's the connection between their complaint and the attack of the worst enemy the Jewish people have ever had to endure throughout all history? So he explains, he brings the Medrash. The Medrash says it's like a father who puts his son up on his shoulders and carries him around. And everywhere the son sees it, he says to the father, please get that for me. The father bends down and picks it up. And eventually the son, this doesn't happen in real life, obviously, but it's a mashal. Right, everything the son wants, the father gets, but eventually the son gets so used to being on the father's shoulders that he forgets that his father's down below him. He thinks he's 6'6", and he sees a passerby, and he says to the passerby, "Excuse me, sir, have you seen my father?" And the father, "What do you mean? I'm right underneath you. I'm carrying you right now. I'll tell you what. You want to know where I am?" He picks up his son, puts him on the ground, and the dog comes along and bites him. So the Medrash, it's not a complete mashal. It's not exactly parallel, but the point is the point. And that's when the Jewish people ask the question, Hayesh Hashem b'kibbeinu im ayin, is God amongst us or not? That's tantamount to saying, have you seen my father? Because you have the clouds of glory right here. And the miracles, the man is right there. And we just saw the sea split over there, basically. And so what do you mean? You think Hashem has dropped you off here on the side of the highway and said goodbye, and now you're on your own? What kind of question is that? So God says, okay, I'll show you where I am. So he takes us off his shoulders, so to speak, and Amalek attacks. That's the dog. Amalek is always compared to a dog for a number of reasons. But that's the mashal. Now, the question is, and everybody has to ask it, is that, like, how could they even ask a question like that? How could they say to Moshe Rabbeinu, is God amongst us or not? Because God is clearly amongst them because they have the miracles in their very hands. They are surrounded by clouds of glory that met them in the desert, and that is, they can feel the Shekhinah. So therefore, they it's a ridiculous question to even ask. So that's why Kabbalah says that's not the question they're asking. They're not asking is Hashem amongst us or not, but rather instead what they're asking is what level of Hashem is amongst us. Meaning that we understand that there's two levels of Hashgacha Pratis. There's two levels of Hashgacha. Hashgacha Klalis, general Hashgacha, and Hashgacha Pratis, personal Hashgacha. What's the difference? We all know the difference. We all experience the difference. There's a world out there all around us that seems to be quite natural. The sun comes up, the sun goes down. Pretty much the same way every day. It does. The Earth is rotating, and the solar system and the sun is the Earth is rotating, and we're all revolving around the sun. So things are moving. So it's not exactly the precise view every single day. Night changes every single day. Sunset changes every single day, right? Because things are in movement. But for all intents and purposes, we expect the sun to rise. And even if it's a cloudy day, we know the sun's behind there somewhere. And it's got to come out at some point in time. And we expect the sun to set. So we plan for night. And we even calculate today exactly to the second when those are supposed to be based upon astrology, based on astronomy. So it's natural, right? Birth, as miraculous as birth is, it's natural. People go to the hospital every single day to deal with birth and doctors, and one after the other, because it's a miraculous process, and let's not undermine the huge miracle. Nature is just consistent miracle. There's no such thing as nature, really, right? The gematria of the word hateva, which means done nature, is equal to the name Elohim, Aleph Lamed Hey Yud Mem, 86, to tell you that it's still God. The difference between nature and miracle is that nature is a miracle that happens on a consistent basis all the time. You light oil, it burns. You can count on that. You like vinegar, it's not going to burn. So if it burns for some strange reason, as the story in the Gemara, that we call a nace, because the word nace means banner. And when a nace happens, it advertises like a banner, God is here, alive and well, and operating in human history. But nature, like the word matbeya, right? Matbeya is a coin, not a coin as Levi in Israel, but a coin, like money, right? And it's called a matbeya because how do you make a matbeya? Basically, you have a minting press and you cut out the exact same thing over and over again. It's consistently the same thing. So therefore comes in the word teva, which means the same idea, is consistent. So nature is running the world every single day all around us. And things are happening naturally. And a lot of things are happening unnaturally, or they happen in cycles and longer periods of naturalness, through history. But that's what we call nature. But it's not. It's just God willing the world to function the same way all day long. I mean, he goes so far as to say, and this is beyond. I can't get my head around this. I don't know how anybody else can. But we're told by the rabbis, we're told by tradition that the truth is that creation was not a one-shot deal back at the beginning 5,785 years ago. And it's been ongoing since then, but rather God recreates the entire thing every single second. Another reason. This second. But how is it possible? Why are we starting from scratch every single second then? I mean, I have continuity. I'm saying something, and the next thing will be built upon what I said previously. And life is the same way. That's part of the miracle. That not only does God recreate creation, but it picks up the next second where the last one left off. So we have the sense of nature, and it's ongoing. Don't try and think about that. You can be appreciative of that, but to understand how that's possible, it's beyond comprehension. Then again, God is beyond comprehension. It's not like a maestro leading an orchestra who's got 80 pieces of music to conduct. That's amazing in its own right, but that's manageable. It's clearly manageable because people are doing it. Not everybody, but the ones who can. But to recreate creation for billions of people every single second and let their bodies function as if they're growing up, and that's beyond comprehension. But that's what it says. But that's the natural world. We call that teva. We call that nature. We call that hashgacha klalis. God's doing it. He's running it. Every single second he has to will it, but he does it in a way that seems in a very general sense that seems to be applicable to everybody the same way, right? The Gentiles and the Jews, the animals, and human beings. We're all affected by this hashgacha klalis. Then there's hashgacha pratis. Hashgacha pratis is more specific. That's where God actually steps in and interferes, and he tampers with nature. He interferes in the process and does a miracle, like splitting the sea or making man. Man does not fall from the sky ever for anybody unless somebody is on a plane dropping food from above. But that's not man, right? That the fact that man is able to do that is because it's a miracle. God's that's a more specific. So in Kabbalah, it's actually identified as two levels of divine providence. One is called ayin, and the word ayin usually means nothing, but in this case, it's the most something can ever be, because it's referring to a level of divine reality that's so sublime, it's so spiritual that from our perspective, physically speaking, it's as if not even there. It's like your soul, right? Where's your soul? There's souls around us right now, right in this room. There's probably a bunch of souls, but I can't see them, can't even sense them, can't even feel them, because physically speaking, Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, is still in the world, still here. Where'd it go? God just packed it up like a tent and took it away? No, it's still here. So how can we can't see it? Because we dropped down spiritually and we lost the spiritual capacity to be able to recognize that level of reality. So therefore, it could be looking right at it and miss it. We do that everyday life too. I mean, just looking for your keys sometimes. You can be looking right at it and not see them. Depends what your brain is doing, what your mind is doing. Depends on the spiritual level that you're on as well. So, that's the spiritual realm, and that's why people who rise up to higher spiritual levels of existence by going through Pardes, Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Sod, the four different levels of Torah, they can see things the rest of the world can't. And they can start to see the miracle. And this is, by the way, we mentioned this umpteen times, right? Chanin ben Dos and his daughter, she lights vinegar by mistake, Erev Shabbos. We don't need to ask questions. How did she make the mistake? Every Shabbos people make mistakes. It's not impossible. The problem was not that she lit the vinegar. The problem was the vinegar was burning, right? Because if the vinegar it wasn't burning, she just poured it out. She would have recognized her mistake, pour it out, and put Shem and Zayas in instead, and light it. But the problem is that it was burning. It was as if it was oil. So she ran to her father, very concerned, because she was a righteous lady, who probably a Tamach Chacham in her own right. And she knew that when miracles happen for people, they don't come for free. And maybe it might come off her merit in the world to come. So she was very concerned. She came to her father and she said to her father, what, now what? The vinegar is burning. So he says, well, that depends upon you. Whether or not you understand that the only reason why oil burns consistently is because God tells it to burn every single time. But there's really no difference between vinegar and oil in as much as they're both, just materials that could either burn or not burn. And the only reason why they do burn is because God says so. Oh, but what about the fact that we see the carbon atoms are inside Shem and Zayas, and they're combustible and not inside vinegar? No, that's the way we found the world. We only came to that conclusion because we noticed that Shem and Zayas always burns, and things with those type of atoms tend to be flammable. So we came to the conclusion that must be, but that's only because God says they're flammable. There's nothing intrinsic about those molecules that make them flammable other than the fact that that's the way God presents nature to us. So we see that there are two levels of providence, one in which God runs the world regardless of what we do. That's why we have situations in history, right, where the Jewish people were not fitting to be redeemed from Egypt. They were not worthy of it. That's why when Moshe Rabbeinu came and said, you're going out of Egypt this month, they said it's not possible. They were talking Hashgacha Klalis. They hadn't witnessed yet Hashgacha Pratis. Their forefathers did, but they hadn't. And they said, based upon the laws of nature, the only way to get out of Egypt is either we fight our way out, which is not going to happen because we don't have the army and the strength to do that, or B, with a supernatural thing. And as far as we know, naturally speaking, you have to have a merit to be able to have that kind of miracle. We don't have that because we're involved in idol worship. We're not living up to the standards of our ancestors. So therefore, as far as we're concerned, there's no way you can be right. So Moshe comes back and he says to the Jewish people, and he's mechadish something. He tells her a very interesting idea. It's a chiddush. It's a new idea. They haven't heard it before, and it's a chiddush even to most of us because no one teaches it to us. But he says you have to understand when it comes to redemption, it comes to geula, it's a different track. It's a different track. It's the level called ayin that the Jewish people referred to. Hayesh Hashem b'kirbeinu im ayin. When we read that verse on a very simple, shot level, as far as we're concerned, there's only one reference to God in that verse. Hayesh Hashem birkibenu, amongst us, im ayin, or not. Because that's the way you read it. That's in Hebrew. That's how you would read it. Is God amongst us or not? But how many times is God mentioned? Only once. But Kabbalah says no, he's mentioned twice. Right? Hayesh Hashem birkibenu, that's one. Right? Oh, in ayin or ayin, the second level, because the Jewish people have already seen how, even though they should not have left Egypt, they were not worthy of it whatsoever. God took them out anyhow, and He did miracles for them that clearly they had not earned, and it wasn't coming off their cheshbon in the world to come. It's just that God wanted the redemption to occur. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, when that happens, God ignores everything else we're doing and shines his light, does the miracles regardless of what's going on down below. It's not based upon our merits or demerits. Yet we find there are other times, non-redemption times, when we do affect the outcome of a situation. Our prayers make a difference, right? The mitzvahs we do make a difference. We give tzedakah to make a difference because we're told, right, that if we do certain things, then that will influence the spheres. Because when you do a mitzvah, you learn Torah, do a mitzvah, you're drawing down light. It's very, Kabbalistic, complicated, mochin, bringing light into the brains, and it's affecting the whole body of the spheres. But simplest level possible, that we're bringing down light, and that light fixes the world and brings blessing, because that light is blessing. So a person's suffering financially, they can't, they're not making ends meet for whatever reason, and they're trying to change their mazel, or not their mazel per se, but at least their hashgacha. So what they do basically, they go learn extra Torah, they maybe give tzedakah, they put on tefillah merkavana, whatever they decide to do to try to influence, because it doesn't make a difference. And although it does make a difference, you should keep it in the category, right? So if it's money you're concerned about, you should do things with money, right? You should put more money into a mitzvah, right? Spend more money in Shabbos, give more tzedakah to people who need, or give that tzedakah with more intention, with more feeling, with more sympathy, more empathy, right? To affect that type of light will come down and will affect you, and then you get that mercy, and it will change your matzah. So that's the question the Jewish people are asking. The Leshem explains, based upon the Zohar. Is ayin amongst us? In other words, we're going to the desert, which is a dangerous place, and the only way to survive is by miracle. So who's gonna accompany us when we go there? Is that going to be ayin, the level of Arach Ampin at the very top, which is unaffected by our merits or demerits, which is a good thing, because if we sin, we're in trouble, right? And there's a good chance we will. We're far from perfect. We've been enslaved for hundreds of years. We just got out. Yes, God's done great miracles, but it's hard to be a Baal Tshuva. It's hard to change your ways on the spot forever for the best. We know ourselves, and not to mention the fact that we have the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude amongst. Oh, that's the whole story to itself. Who will be there to instigate and cause all kinds of problems. So if we want to know, before we go into this dangerous situation, are miracles going to happen for us regardless of our situation? Or are we going to be the ones to control them by what we do? Because if the latter is the case, we are scared. We are scared to death to go into the desert. We don't trust ourselves. We know that God can do anything he wants. We've seen that. He controls the world. We're not children in that respect to think that God is limited in any way. We're concerned about us, that we will do that will hold God's hand back from being able to take care of us. We're our own worst enemy. And we know that. So therefore, that was the question they were asking. So that's a good question. That's a reasonable question, it would seem to be. And if that's the case, then why are they punished for it? Why does God say, for that reason, here comes Amalek? So the answer is what we said at the beginning. It wasn't the question. The question was a good question. That was not the problem. It was the way they asked the question, with doubt, with sarcasm, with a lack of appreciation. That's important because that itself indicates the patience, the trust that we have in Hashem. If they'd said to Moshe Rabbeinu, look, they didn't have to sit in their hands and say, what's with the water? What's with the water? And wait till the last second and then die in the process or not die in the process. It was okay to be concerned. They had children. They had elderly people to take care of too, who couldn't take care of themselves. So to ask the question in a way that expressed your trust and your alliance upon Hashem with biava, with love, right? Then that would have been fine, and Hashem would have no problem to question. But then again, maybe the question from that perspective wasn't even necessary, because they'd already seen up until now, every time they got into a situation that they could not get out of on their own, God came through. So why not in the future? Why not from this point onward? It's better to go down trusting in God. For some reason, God doesn't come through in the way that we think he should, that we want him to, right? Because he's always doing good. That's the principle. Whatever he does is all for the good. We know that. We say it all the time. right? But the point is that sometimes for historic reasons and something for personal tikkun reasons. I mean, Aaron Cohen was the Gilgul of Haran. Haran was Abraham's brother, and Haran had a choice to jump into the fiery furnace of Ur Kasdim like his brother and do a Kiddush Hashem. But he didn't want to do it till he saw that Avram survived. Once he saw the miracle occur, so now I'm prepared to go in. But that's the you can't put yourself in a situation of danger and expect a miracle because the miracle might not happen, and it didn't. He died instead. So it was a Chilul Hashem in the end. So therefore, he reincarnated again as Aaron, which is why the name Aharon has the word Haran built into it. And he was supposed to have died at Mount Sinai, stopping the golden calf, which he didn't do. And the Arizal speaks about in Shar Gilgulim, Shar Psukim, how he had to reincarnate several times and not Avihu to fix everything up. And it was an ongoing process. But sometimes we die. Sometimes heroes die in the process. Pinchas didn't. Pinchas in the Chumash, he did the act, he survived, 6 miracles happened, so that he should survive in the end. But there's other heroes for the Jewish people who have not survived. That's okay. I mean, it's not okay for the family who have to mourn them, and certainly the person who wanted to live, but the gadol, right? In the larger, bigger picture, it's okay. Meaning that was the best thing for them. That was the best thing for history. It's a hard one to get over. It's a hard one. Rabbi Kiva did. He was able to do it. And the 10 martyrs that we mourn on Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur, they did. They were okay with it. They made peace with it. They went lovingly, but they found out first that was going to be the case because they sent Rabbi Yishmael up to ask, and Gabriel asked, on behalf of them what the story was, and he came back and said, yeah, you're all going to have to do Al Kiddush Hashem. So once they knew that, I mean, if we know that, this is then maybe it would be easier for us too. That's it's all part of the Emunah and all part of Hashem looking out for us and doing what has to be done. But back to the original point, you have these 2 levels of Hashgacha. In Kabbalah, it's a very technical reality. And we'll start it, and maybe it might take some time to finish it as Rosh Hashem, but the basic idea is like this. Again, we've also spoken about the fact that the biggest problem in making creation was finding a way to take the infinite light of God, which cannot be contained by any container because it is infinite, was somehow reduced in intensity enough to result in all of this. And not just result in all of this, but to such an extreme that people can actually be made from the light of God, have a soul that's a portion of God, so to speak, and actually live with the energy that's coming directly from God every single day, and yet somehow still come to the conclusion that God doesn't exist, and stand there and yell it out. Darwinists and all those who don't believe in the soul, and all these scientists or pseudoscientists who have come to the conclusion that there's no such thing as eternity in the world to come. It's all being done with the energy of God. Boy, will they have to answer for that in the end. That's how far God went to distill his light spiritually that the world can exist. So that's a great thing because we exist for those who are enjoying existence, right? And it's a great thing because we have free will and we can make decisions that seem to count. Whether they do or they don't doesn't make a difference. As far as we're concerned, they do and affect our portion of what's to come, and will go eternally. We've already had a lot of pleasure in this world. We already had a lot of people have already enjoyed themselves, if not this Gilgal, previous times. Everybody at some point in time has been able to enjoy this world, and it's a fraction, we're told, of the enjoyment that we're supposed to be able to enjoy in the future time in the world to come. So he did all that by reducing his light and creating a system that constantly filters that light in ways that allows for creation to exist and history to function, humans to do their thing and have free will and make a difference. That's a very general overview of the idea, but that's the concept. But the way that he did it is something that Kabbalah calls tikkun. Now, the word tikkun is used all the time. It's used by plumbers, it's used by electricians, it's used by Kabbalists. I mean, Tikkun just means rectification. It just means fixing something, right? You want to tack in your tap, you maybe add some oil or something like that, or change the piping, right? It's a tikkun, right? You've probably heard stories of dibbuks, right, who came back in people's bodies and took over the body and was yelling out things like tikkun, tikkun. They've come back for a tikkun, and the rabbi comes and does certain Kabbalistic things, and hopefully it helps the soul to move on its way. We're familiar with the word. The word is very familiar, but the real deeper meaning of the word tikkun, according to Kabbalah, which really is the origin of it, is the idea a tikkun is anything which by definition allows the light of God to become more accessible. Because it by all rights, it should be completely inaccessible all the time. There's no way we should be able to access the reality of God, the light of God. The fact that we can is because of tikkunim. But it wasn't a one-shot deal. It didn't happen all at the same time. Happened in many stages. In Kabbalah, in the Idra Rabbi Jazuta, these are two very important sections of the Zohar. Sefer Tznius is another one where they actually outline in explicit detail, mind-blowing detail, how the light went from that to the next stage, to the next stage, to the next stage, to the next stage, the next stage, the next stage, lots of stages in between. And every time the light had to do something different, it was called the tikkun. It was part of the tikkun process. And eventually, when the light got to a point where this could exist, that was the ultimate tikkun and fulfillment of the concept of tikkun in the end. But the names given to different tikkunim sound familiar because you have things like the skull. There's a skull, Golgotha, right? The skull is that bony thing holding our brains inside, keeping the head together. Basically, it's a hard bone, you need it, right? It protects the head, protects the brains, right? But it's a concept that originates at the very, very top. You have a membrane inside around the brain to protect it, right? And to act as a way to keep it moist and all the other things, and that go on brains, right? And that's called a krum, right? In Kabbalah, there's a thing called kuma devira, which is there's a membrane of a level called a vira, which is actually it's called light, and it's called air because a vira is air, but actually a vira is the word or with a yud because it comes goes on. You can get the idea, right? But Kruma Devira is basically the spiritual membrane made from divine light to act as a barrier between levels. And then you have what's called the Moch Stima, which is actually not part of the Tikkun here, but it's another level of Tikkun, which is literally the hidden brain inside. And you have things called eyes. Eyes. There are eyes, the eyes that are always open and always looking. It's a long name, but that's what it's called on the level of Archampin, on the very, very top. And you even have a thing called forehead, Metzach, right? You look in, for those who do Askinus Sedasa, by Su Shlishis at least, most people do it by that, not everyone does it with the other meals, but if you do it there, and there's a long, that B'nai Challah that follows after that, there's a textual change, right? Where you have a choice of using one word, forget the word, or the word mitzcha, which means forehead. A metzach is a forehead. It's in brackets. So a lot of people don't mention the word metzach. I don't know what the prevalent tradition is, but having seen some Kabbalah, I use mitzcha because that's the higher level. That's the real deeper pshat. It means a forehead, but a forehead in Kabbalah is a level in the spheres actually where the light of God is starting to become so accessible that the will of God becomes more accessible, more visible on that level. And then you have after that you have the nose and the two nostrils. Literally sounds strange saying it in English. In Hebrew, even it sounds strange, but it's in Aramaic. Again, mentioned Sefer Tznius. All these things are brought down, and these two nostrils act as a way for light to come down. The problem is this, is that we grow up in a very physical world, very material world, and everything we're used to is all in physical terms. So, nose is important. You have to love your nose and take care of your nose because without it you can't breathe, and it gets stuff, it's hard to function. And if it runs, you have to blow your nose. Nose, we understand the nose is important. It's holding my glasses on my face right now. Without that, just fall right off, right? But that doesn't have such a holy, theme to it, so to speak. But in the spheres, up at the very top, it is the ultimate level of revelation of God's light that comes out. And you should know the light that comes out from the right nostril, again, it sounds so strange, but it comes from the right nostril is all the light for these 6,000 years of history we're living right now. And the light that comes out, I'm not making this up, this is from Kabbalah, right? That the light that comes from the left nostril is actually the light that's intended from 6,000 onward. That's what's going on up there. But the one that I'm focusing on right now is the eyes. And we talk about Hinei lo yinu v'lo yishan shmo Yisrael, that he neither sleeps nor slumbers, and always is protecting the Jewish people. That's talking about the eyes, hashkacha, supervision, the eyes of Arch Ampin, and they're always open. They don't even have eyelashes. I mean, we're getting nothing physical, spiritual, but there's no concept of eyelashes or even eyebrows because the eyes don't need to be, they're open the entire time. And not only they open the entire time, but they're both considered to be white eyes. They actually, even though there's two eyes, there's no real left eye. It's like a right eye because that's the level of complete mercy. On Yom Kippur, Shem Slichos, Svardim every day except for Shabbos and Yantiv. We mentioned the Yud Gimel Midas Rachamim, the 13 principles of faith. They're rooted there, a little lower, but not up there, because constant mercy. Those eyes never close. They're always open, and Kabbalah explains that if those eyes were to close for 1 second, it means the light would be cut off and existence would just go poof like that. Not die, disappear. Go back to the origins without any tzimtzum. That's the level of ayin. Not ayin with an ayin, which is the letter, there's a word, for eye, but ayin with an aleph, which means in this case, very spiritual light. That's always ongoing hashkacha pratis. But there's a lower level because the light's getting filtered. We don't live in that level, not yet, not way to the future. And there's a lower level on the level Kazer Ampin. And that level, there's also eyes. But in that level, right, that controls our level of reality, that's a level where the eyes can close. And we say to Kosh Baruch Hu, we ask Hashem to wake up. As Haman said, God's sleeping. We ask him to wake up. It's compared to a person who sleeps at night, right? The only reason we know a person's sleep is their eyes are closed. If a person's eyes are open, people sleepwalk. It's hard to tell if they're awake or not, right? But the clothes are, but the body's still functioning. The body's still working. The heart's pumping, the brain's working. I mean, things slow down somewhat, but the limbs are still, although it does say that your brain, paralyzes your body somewhat at nighttime when you sleep, so you won't sleepwalk in the end. But for all intents and purposes, the body isn't shut down. It's not like some building where at nighttime you turn off all the lights and turn off all the functions because no one's there. No, the body's functioning. The eyes are closed. So that's Zer Ampin. There are two levels of hashkacha pratis. See, Zer Ampin gets all of its light, all the hashkacha, all the supervision that we need for redemption, that we should be protected from our enemies, but the world should be filled with blessing, only comes into the world because the eyes of Zer Ampin get light from the eyes of Arch. It's like a son looking into his father's eyes. Right? And he's looking to his father's eyes, and his eyes are begging his father for mercy, and the father's looking back and giving that mercy. As long as the eyes are connected, the relationship is there, the son's going to have the mercy. But if for some reason the son looks away, he stops looking at his father, he goes someplace else, the father might stop thinking about the son. The mercy might stop. So the only reason why good comes into the world is because those eyes are connected. The eyes that oversee our reality, that supervise our reality, and the eyes that are always open, overseeing everything on a general basis, and running things from afar, way up in the system. That's the basic system. And clearly, what we affect is the lower one. We don't need to affect it. That's what Moshe said to the Jewish people. You don't have to affect it. It's not dependent upon you. If it was, you probably destroyed the world anyhow. So God only controls that. But the level down below that they asked about Hashem, Hayesh Hashem B'Kibin Ayin, Yud Ke Vav Ke, the level of Zer Ampin, that's the level of Yud Ke Vav Ke, right? That's the one that our actions can affect. We don't have time to finish right now. We'll have to continue this B'Zvar Hashem, next week. It's an important point for understanding history and what's going on. But this is one of the reasons why I share tefillah, right? Why they're closed. and the gates of tears are still open. You might think that if the gates of prayer are closed and the gates of tears are still open, that maybe the gates of tears are lower than the gates of prayer. It's actually not that way at all. The gates of tears are on a higher level. It has to do with the spheres of Chachma and Bina and how we affect these things and how our lives affect these things. And B'ezras Hashem, we talk about that a bit more. I think you'll have a better understanding of history and what's going on. Okay? Shabbat Shalom and B'seres Tevis. Only good news for all the good people in the world.